Part two. So I should say, first of all, if these buttons don't show up right when you first load this up, that is something that sometimes happens. You can just click away and click back, and they should move into the right spot. So this is what your board should look like once you've done your initial setup. It'll have your ranked list of players with all their player values here, the site rankings for whatever format you're on. So this is on ESPN right now. There are a few headings here that you can change what data displays. Right now it's on NFBC, but you can pull that up. You can switch to, for instance, ADP for that site. So ESPN ADP would pull in average auction value if they have that available on their site for auction formats. FP, that's Fantasy Pros, so it'll pull in the Fantasy Pros rankings. Fantrax ADP. This is the ESPN Keeper ranks, could be useful for Keeper Dynasty leagues. And then finally Dynasty Guru, which right now is pulling in the 2019 rankings, but when 2020 is available, those will pull in as well. I'll leave it on NFBC for now. You know, early in the preseason, NFBC is the best ADP data that we have to go on. The one thing you want to keep in mind is that NFBC is 2-catcher format, so catchers are going to be higher than where they would be drafted for standard leagues. And NFBC tends to have these more high upside draft styles where people are trying to win the overall competition. There's huge prizes associated with that, so they mostly care about upside, and they don't care so much about the boring old vet type guys. So, you know, when you see like a Joe Adele going 5 rounds earlier than you expect in NFBC, that's why. This heading has the BIGz score selected by default, which again, that's the player value calculated for your specific league. Even if you're not in an auction league, you can still work in terms of dollars. This is how the board puts players in rank order for you for your snake draft. You can switch this to a few different things. So if you want to see, for instance, the 5x5 score as a point of comparison against whatever your scoring format is. If you want to see your punt score, which again we set up previously on the settings tab, and you can also see the above average scores. So the Z-score values, even if you're not in Z-scores, that's just what we call these. These are the ones with replacement level adjustments. The ones that end in AA are above average, meaning that it's just the raw score without any replacement level adjustment applied. So that could be a way to, you know, later in the draft when you're just drafting bench guys and you don't really care about the replacement level adjustment, you can take a look at that. You know, in this case, you can see that in the unadjusted version, starters are much, much higher. Player name, self-explanatory. Position, lists the position of each player. We'll talk about in a minute here how you can change the positions if you want to. Position rank, this is by default just showing the, you know, for instance, Mike Trout is the 3rd outfielder in this format right now. But if you want to, there are a few different things you can display there. So MLB team, self-explanatory. And then there are a bunch of options for showing the difference between where your board values this guy and where these different formats value them. So if I show BIGz minus NFBC, what that's doing is it's converting the NFBC rank into a dollar value, and then it is comparing your dollar value computed by the sheet and seeing how those things differ. So that can be useful if you're looking for, you know, who are the guys that I value more than ADP in this format. You can go on to next couple columns, again, are self-explanatory. Age of the player, team that they've been drafted to. So this is where you will draft players into. You can either use the drop downs in here, you can type directly in, or you can use the draft interface up there, which we'll talk about in a minute. This D column, this is like a shortcut way of marking players as drafted. You know, sometimes in the middle of the draft, you're in a hurry. You don't care about what team a guy got drafted to. You just want to mark them as drafted. This is kind of the equivalent of like if you're doing this on pen and paper and you just want to put a little strike through the player to show that they're gone. So the default way that this works is that it puts a little Y in there when it's your team that's drafted the guy, and it puts an N for not your team drafted a guy. So if you want to do that manually, you can just go through, put an N, put an N. These guys are now being removed from the player pool for the rest of the different parts of the interface. The W column, this is your watch list. So if you want to put a guy on the watch list, that'll be pulled up in another tab. You can just put a little W next to the guy. That's it. Now this is where all your stats will show up. If you've pressed the big button, then it should show the stats that you selected on your settings tab. Shows always as well plate appearances and innings pitched, or if you're in a points league, this column will get replaced by total points. Over here is your notes column. You can enter whatever you want for each player, just to keep track of things. If you want to say like this is a guy that you want to target. If you want to say like, you're reading Eno Saris and he said that Garrett Cole's going to be great this year, you can put this in as like something like that. Over here, multi-positional eligibility. The way that the sheet works is that each player is listed just at their most valuable position. But if there are multiple positions that a guy's eligible for, they'll be listed over here. And that includes also like left, center, and right field for formats that distinguish between those three. One thing that can be useful for that multi-position column is that you can use these filter buttons to filter for guys that are eligible at more than one position. And this is, also just a quick tutorial on how these guys work in case you haven't seen them before. There are little filter buttons on each column, so you can do this for any column in the board. You can use this to sort. You can use this to filter for specific values, and you can filter by condition. So in this case, what I'm going to try to show, we can clear out. So right now it's showing everything, right? There's no filter on. If we deselect everything and we type in here, like let's look at guys that are eligible at third base. So these are multi-position eligible guys that are eligible at third base. We filter the sheet. There we go. So now these are all your multi-eligible guys. You can see that they're listed at different positions if they're more valuable. So say like DJ LeMahieu, he's eligible at third. He's also eligible at first, but he's listed at second base. So this is one way to pull those guys up in a pinch. Last column is the injuries column. So this is using the MLB database of DL stints from 2019. I've gone through and created this list for you that shows what the injuries were and how long they were on the shelf. And if it ended a guy's season, it will also indicate that. For the most part, these should be cleaned up. MLB's DL data was ugly last year, but I've done my best to get this looking nice and clean for you guys. So another quick example of how you could use those filter buttons, you can, if you want to look at just a single position at some point in the draft, let's say you're looking for a catcher, you can go in, click catcher, and that'll pull up the rest of the catchers that are left. You can also filter for specific stats. So say you want to go and look for, I want a guy that's going to hit greater than 25 home runs. Okay, so that'll pull in just the guys that are over 25 homers. And then if you want to filter that by also guys that are going to hit, let's say, at least 270. Okay, there we go. So these are just the decent power, decent average guys with the rest filtered out. And so again, you can always go in and clear those out, get back to the standard version of the sheet. I should note here that a lot of the scripts in the board will not work if you have this main sheet filtered. So make sure that you generally turn those filters back off when you're done using them, because otherwise you can get some errors. So the last things on this tab are this display stuff up at the top here. You'll get a running total of what pick you're at, as well as what round and what pick within that round. It'll track inflation. If you're not doing an auction draft, don't worry about that. your hit pitch, whatever you're setting for your hit pitch, is shown here, and then this is the actual hit pitch to this point in the draft, just based on which players have been taken. The hit pitch for your team versus the hit pitch for all other teams is also broken out over there, as well as a running average of the stats for your team. So right now you can see these are just from the 2 players that have been marked there, but if we say added some players on the pitching side, then you should get averages that pop in here as well for each team. These are generally your targets. Those are sort of based on the once a full team has been rostered across the league for each team. These are what the averages would be in each category. You want to be at least above that. A lot of people say that you want to shoot for like 3rd place in every category. So if you're going for that, that's not what these are. That is something that you could maybe keep track of when you're looking at your standings page. It'll also keep a running total of how many players have been drafted at each position, as well as what it thinks should be the number of starters at each position based on your lineup positions. So that's pretty useful. And then final thing, so up here we have the draft interface. You can see it says that this is an invalid input because Mike Trout's already been drafted. So we can click on that and we'll get a drop down of remaining players. So let's say like Bellinger has been drafted to team 4, and then we hit draft. Note that if you're in an auction league, you'll also have another box here that shows up, and that's for entering the cost of the player, so the dollars that they went for in the auction. And there will also be another column that shows up here that tracks that, just a little $sign column. If you want to do that manually during your auction draft, you can also just, as I showed for the previous players, like use the drop down, enter the team, and then enter the cost. There are a few little buttons up here to just act as shortcuts, basically. So this sort button will sort your board by, we can just see it, sort it by the dollar values. I personally find it a little bit faster just to use those filter buttons and hit sort. The hide/show drafted button, that's either going to take and hide the players that have been drafted if they're currently displayed just by filtering them out, or it will show them if you've already hidden them. Again, there's a little bit faster way to do this, which is that you can just use the filter buttons like I showed you, and either choose to hide the players that have been marked as drafted or to show them. So now they're back. Okay, backup and restore. These are potentially useful if you're worried about messing things up mid-draft and you want to just put a little bookmark on what you've marked as drafted so far. So if you hit backup, that's going to take these rosters from here and put them into another spot that's hidden away in the sheet for safekeeping. So then say you accidentally go in and mark some guys to the wrong teams or something, and you want to get back your previous backup, you can just hit restore, and it'll restore this guy back to where you previously backed it up. There we go. So there are a few more things that can help you out with this pre-draft setup type thing. So we can go over to the picks tab. Again, this is only if you're in a snake draft, otherwise you can ignore it. But if you are, it will automatically generate the expected snake draft order and show that here. If you have pick trading in your league, then you can come and change what team gets these picks. This is also where you would come in if your league does something wacky with keepers or some other sort of draft order that isn't a snake or a straight draft. You can come in here and manually change the order. Really, this is just the place in the sheet where it's going to go to figure out how to populate this team box up here. So if, say, like I draft Francisco Lindor to team 8, then it's going to go into that sheet and see, okay, we're at pick 9 in the draft, so what team has pick 9? It's team 9, so it'll put team 9 in there. Just a little bit of a shortcut. I mentioned that I would show you how to change the age and position for players, so that's all stored in this age and position sheet here. You can either Control F and find the player that you want to change. So say like Jonathan Shoup, we want to list him at a different position. We could come in here, say he gains like third base mid-season. It'll give you a warning just so that you don't come in here and accidentally delete this stuff. You know, if you're going to make a bunch of changes, you can check that and it won't warn you again. So it'll switch him over to third base if you do that. Yahoo positions, again, are stored separately because they have this totally different wacky system. And this is also where the multi-position eligibilities are stored, and the left field, center field, right field designations for people that play in leagues that differentiate. This is also where if you have entered additional players in your player pool, they'll be stored down at the bottom down here. So that's all these guys are ones that I've sort of manually added in. The rest of this list is generated based on games played last season, versus these are the ones that I've manually added in. So as you add players to the list, they'll populate down here, or you can just do it manually yourself now that you know that this is here. Then there's the roster import tab. So this one is a way to pull in league rosters. Say you have like a long time league that has keepers or something and you want to pull in the existing rosters. Or if, say, you know, you get the big board mid-season and you want to populate this with the existing rosters in your league, maybe to use the trade tool or something like that, evaluate free agents, then you can come in here and do that. So the way that this works is that you have your players listed here, the team that they're on listed there, and if there is a salary associated with them, list that there. The player names, I'll note, have to match the Fangraphs player spellings, otherwise it won't be able to pull them in. Most of the time it doesn't matter, but for things like sometimes like a Lance McCullers will be listed as Lance McCullers Jr., Ronald Acuna Jr. Some formats use the like the tilde over the N, for instance, in Spanish players' names. So just make sure you double check that stuff. So then the last thing, of course, is to hit the import rosters button here. That'll run the script where it'll pull your players from here and move them into your big board. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. In the next one, I'll go into more of the sort of in-draft evaluation tools, like the best remaining tab and all that good stuff.